Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast. We are thrilled, as always. I need a new word. We're just so excited to have everyone with us on YouTube, on all the platforms, wherever you are listening to us, watching us, whatever it is that you're doing. We are excited to have you with us today. We have an interview for you today. And I'm excited to be doing an interview. We've had a little bit of a break in recording for ourselves, which you obviously don't know, but we do. And so it's exciting for us to be back in the saddle. I don't know, it's such a silly phrase, but back at it and talking to people about self-worth and busyness and what that means in their lives. So before we get started, as always, I'm going to welcome my incredible, fantastical, amazing co-host Tova, who is looking at me like I'm a little bit, I said the word. We're trying to get rid of words that make us
I'm
feel
not allowed
smaller.
to say the word little.
And I'm not supposed to say just. So we're working on these things.
Yes.
So you all know, as life coaches, we have work to do ourselves.
And we coach each other.
Apparently. And apparently. And this is the way it goes. So anyway, welcome, Tova. How is life going for you today?
It is good. I was thinking of other words. I've been leaning into the word delighted and delightful recently. I've been using that a lot. It doesn't have quite the excitement of thrilled, but I think it's an underused word when describing something, because I think if somebody was like, "Oh, I was visiting Tova, it was delightful," I would have been like, "Thank you," So
that's pleasant.
Yeah, but pleasant to me feels condescending.
Not in the snarky way.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. We like to talk about words, as you all know. So sorry, we're having like a real geek out moment here.
I'm older than the last time we recorded.
That's right.
And that's kind of exciting.
Yep.
And I don't know if I'm any wiser than the last time recorded, but I am older. So I will take that.
Yep.
Because like my grandmother either said, you either get older or, you don't. And that's not good.
That's such a grandma saying.
Those are your two options.
You get older or you die.
Yes,
thanks, grandma.
Exactly.
Thanks.
But in other news, I am super, super excited for our guest today. And I am excited because this is one of those people who I feel like I know really well, and I don't actually know her at all because of the wonderful world of social media, virtual relationships, friendships. And so I'm just super excited that she's joining us today.
Yeah, I am as well. So let's get to it, right?
Yeah, let's get to it.
All right. So we're going to welcome to the show today, Jordana Horn Gordon. And as you all know, all season long, we're talking about busyness and self-worth, and we've covered all kinds of ground. And we're going to keep that conversation going today while we're talking to her. And she's a fellow podcaster and parenting expert. So let me tell you a little bit about her as she comes on, and then we'll get started talking to her. So Jordana has been deemed a parenting expert by both NBC Today Show and Fox and Friends. So it must be true, right? She's host of the popular parenting podcast Call Your Mother, and interviews parents on everything from celebrity to addiction, and host of the podcast Characters on the Couch, which takes a deep dive into the psychological makeup of popular TV characters. Very cool stuff. Jordana is a contributing editor at the Jewish parenting site Kveler, and has written extensively on parenting for the Today Show, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, among other publications. If you can't tell, she's pretty awesome. I'm just throwing that in there into her bio. as my own personal opinion. She has been a panelist and a panel moderator across the country on parenting. She studied English and communications at the University of Pennsylvania, went to graduate school for international relations at the London School of Economics, and got her JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She's a retired attorney and past New York bureau chief for Israel's largest English language newspaper, the Jerusalem Post. So she's super lazy, you guys. She like does nothing, right? Like it's obviously what we're talking about. She's a mother to 6 children aged 7 to 18. As I said, does nothing and has the not insubstantial undereye bags to prove it. In her spare time, she reads and tries to save American democracy through voter registration and engagement. I know I'm being sarcastic and joking, but that, like, an amazing bio, an awesome human, and we're super fortunate to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you
And
so much for having me.
welcome.
I'm thrilled, and not only that, but I just want to inject that maybe like most, unfortunately, women, every time that I'm asked to do anything, I have a very real case of those of you who are watching on YouTube will appreciate this of like me. So you know when you say things and I'm like and you know and I think that I think maybe that goes to part of the root of what we're going to be talking about today, so
Yeah.
I'll sit on that idea.
Yeah.
Well, we do have like big important things to talk about, and part of me though is just like I just really want to talk about that Ted Lasso episode from your I don't even know the name. I was
Yeah,
like, I jumped
characters
at
on the
characters on the
couch.
couch.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, just as an aside for anyone, definitely check out that podcast because I have a feeling that isn't going to come up in today's conversation because it's a little more pop culture. But I think I'm a big TV watcher, and it just made me realize how many shows I need to catch up on. When
It's
I was
true.
like,
It's
oh,
true.
I can't watch
It's
this
actually
one. I
really
can't watch
like
this one.
if you're talking about busyness.
Yeah.
So when I signed up to do this podcast, I was asked to do it along with Dr. Adam Stern, who's a psychiatry professor at Harvard Medical School. So he's the expert, and I'm more of the interviewer slash armchair unofficial expert. Expert only in my own mind. And so we have these conversations, and I signed up for it thinking like, oh, you know, I watch TV, like this is great. But in the meantime, I have to say that it's a little high pressure because you know when we're doing an episode on a show, we have to watch the whole show. So we have to watch all the seasons. And unlike, I'm a very fast reader, but you cannot actually watch a television show at twice speed. You know, you can't do that. And also, I'm sure that I share this in common with a lot of your listeners that my couch has weird hypnotic properties. I'm an insomniac in bed, but my couch in my den, the sleep that one gets there is really quite remarkable. So yeah, so it's been a real challenge. So I appreciate the shout out.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. It's a fun podcast.
Well, and it's interesting because my therapist yesterday, we were chatting about this, and she's like, you read so much. Like she's like, how do you read? And I'm like, well, you know, listen to so many podcasts. And I was like, well, I just always am listening to them while I'm doing other things. But it's one of the reasons that I rewatch shows. Like if it's a show that I like right now, I'm rewatching Grimm because I like really like that show the first time. But if it's a show that I have to like watch and focus on and I can't be doing other things while I'm watching it, then it like moves way far down in my like list of shows to watch because I need to like sit there and do one thing at a time. Then so I was like, man, your list of shows, I want to watch all of them, but it's going to take a lot to get me there. I don't know.
No,
but
I
that's a really interesting commentary on busyness though, right? Because everything we're doing is multi-purpose. We're not doing one thing at a time. And this seems like an aside, but it's not. So I was talking to somebody yesterday about my house, which my house is now too small for my family. Like we can't fit in our house anymore. Arguably, we should just get rid of a lot of things, which we do. Like I'm routinely purging things out of my house and routinely getting rid of stuff. But you know, we have one bathroom and like the kids are going to be teenagers soon, and it's just, you know, it's very frustrating. And this is a super privileged perspective. I would love to be able to have a bigger house. And she was saying, well, why don't you just get, storage furniture? And I said, well, I do. I lived in Brooklyn for a long time. I never bought a piece of furniture that didn't have like six different purposes to it. There was never a time where I bought a bed that didn't also function as storage and a place to like eat and read and like do my work and do 12 other things at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, or whatever else I bought. Like our coffee table is also a storage bench and a place to
Right.
sit at and a place to eat. And it's so, the reason I'm thinking of this is because as I was having this conversation with her, I was also thinking about this interview that we were about to do. And that's, it's the same in life, right? Like you never just sit down and watch a TV show. You sit down and watch a TV show and go on the internet and scroll social media
Mm-hmm.
and also like think about packing the kids lunch for camp the next day and the grocery list you have to make and whatever else is going on in your life, the list of tasks your boss set out for you for the next day. And like I'm getting stressed just even thinking about it and making this statement. Like I could feel my whole body is starting to get tense. And so it's just an interesting, even when you're talking about things that are fun and pop culture and like that are meant to be light and entertainment, it's still a part of that busyness culture that we live
Mm-hmm.
in where you can't just sit down and enjoy a show, right? Like you can't just sit
Right.
down and focus on that thing that's meant to be entertainment because
Right.
you're also doing 25 other things while you're doing it.
I think they're also, I think that's extremely true. And there's another dimension of it that I'm now thinking about just because the last book I read was this great book that was totally unexpected, that KJ Della Antonia recommended on her blog, which was This Book Is Not About Benedict Cumberbatch, um, by Tabitha Carvin. And the book is about this woman who is in Australia. She works for like a research science writer, affiliated with the University of Canberra, I think. And she became a mother, two children, and like many of us, she sort of felt herself getting lost in her new role. And she started watching, I think it was Sherlock. I think that was the gateway drug. And she became kind of obsessed with Benedict Cumberbatch and was, doing like deep dives on the internet, like looking up things about Benedict Cumberbatch, going into like fan fiction about Benedict Cumberbatch, all these things. And she was saying that what's so interesting is that like there's a guy in her office, and his cubicle is all decked out with um, all of this esoteric rugby paraphernalia for his favorite team. I'm pretty sure it was rugby. I really kind of glossed over the sports thing, but this team, the Dragons, and that nobody finds it odd that here he can recite esoteric stats about all these random people and like who they traded for what and all these other things because that's acceptable. And so she started thinking. So the book kind of goes into a different direction about what women find, how women refuse to allow themselves that intellectual free range space to play and to do things that aren't in service of a greater goal. In other words, maybe maybe you're one of those people, and good for you if you are, because I am not, who enjoy exercising, right? So like maybe your Peloton or, your daily run or whatever are like things that really float your boat, and that's great. But those are in service of the greater goal of physical fitness and health, and longevity and all these other things. Whereas men seem to be like really good at just being able to be like, well, I'm taking the day off and, I'm going to go play golf.
Right.
Or, I'm going on a bourbon tasting jaunt with my friends to Kentucky. Like all these things that are not meant to enrich you in a physical, social, spiritual, intellectual way. And that women would be happier if we allowed ourselves that space, that, sort of proverbial room of one's own to take that time for yourself and not for yourself, with the multitasking facet of it, like, oh, I really enjoy reading about colleges. you know, and
Right.
and maybe you do, and that's
Right.
great, you know, but just things that don't have a step B and C to them, but things that are just like reading about butterflies or something, you know,
Yeah.
and or Benedict Cumberbatch, I guess.
Enjoyment for the sake of enjoyment, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
purely, and I use this word in the non-negative sense, purely selfishly, right? Just in the sense of this is what I want and I'm going to do it now. And
Right,
I
and that there's a real stigma about women doing that particularly,
Yeah.
as opposed to
absolutely.
men. Men, it's like, oh, you know, you need to let off steam. Like, oh yeah, I don't need to let off any steam.
What I think
Right.
is
Not at
really
all.
so two things. One is I don't think we've ever used the word selfishly on this podcast in a negative way, just
Mm-mm.
as an aside. And we always say like not negatively, but
I
I don't think
know.
we've ever used it negatively. And two, what I find is really interesting is that I think everything that you've both said is 100% accurate. And but beyond that, women still seem to have the ability to form connections with other people in a stronger way that at least studies up to this point have allowed them to live longer, right? Like that have allowed them to live these more fulfilled lives in a certain, like there's something, like I don't know if fulfilled is the right word, but like even though men are get to go off and like have like it's basically like we've figured out how to do the deep stuff and that helps us live longer, and now we need to like get to do this more superficial stuff and then really like enjoy that and like
Mm.
be able to just embrace that sort of fun stuff and let it just be fun.
Hmm.
um and they can worry about figuring out how to have deep connections
Right,
Yeah,
or
well,
not.
or
or
not.
not,
Yeah,
right.
whatever.
It's not really our problem. But I
Yeah.
mean, to and that's not true, it is. But the fact that we are more collaborative in general, and whether, there's an argument to be made whether that's culturally driven or not. You can envision a society, and quite frankly, that's what our entire company is about, envisioning a society where women collaboratively do these selfish things, right? That we're all off doing doing the things that bring us joy, and we do it together. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's no different than a bunch of men going out golfing. And now the women like to golf too. I don't know why golfing keeps coming up. I just
Right,
keep
right.
thinking of it as like
Well,
the
or
the
I will
place
say,
where like the money is made or whatever. Um I don't know.
I
I'm
mean,
stuck in a bad 80s movie.
yesterday I messaged a friend and I was like, I want to learn how to play pickleball. I hear there's like I've learned that there's like a new like women's pickleball club in my town. And I was like,
Nice.
I want to join that. I don't know how to play pickleball. Um, all that being said, I think it is time for our first break, and then maybe we can come back and ask our
Yeah, we
first
can ask a
actual
question.
question.
Great.
We can get there.
All right, we're gonna take a break and we'll be right back. Know what I really love to do?
Take baths, go for walks, read, drink margaritas, hike.
Yeah, not what I was referring to. You know, we're recording a commercial right now.
I do, but I'm thinking outside the box, being adaptable.
As I was saying, what I love to do is host our live monthly workshops.
Oh, right. That's what we were talking about. Me too. They are a lot of fun to put together and host every month. And we can bring margaritas, so
Join us for live conversation as we get a bit deeper into topics near and dear to our hearts. We go through everything from self-care to setting boundaries.
we share coaching tips, practical advice, and take questions from the audience. It's a whole lot of fun.
Sign up for our newsletter today at goboldlyinitiative.com/contact to make sure you hear about all the upcoming Go Boldly workshops.
You definitely don't want to miss out. Now, back to that show.
Okay, so welcome back. So now the interview is going to actually officially start. No, but so we always like to start with an easy question. You've actually gotten you're the first person I think we've ever interviewed who actually did get to have a conversation before we just dove right in.
Yeah.
And so with
Excellent.
our favorite question to really kick this off, and I'm still gonna ask you, how do you define success?
Oof. Okay, so I'll say this, that my definition of success has both evolved and devolved over the course of my life. Um, I think a lot right now about back when I was 16, 17 years old, largely because my two oldest boys are in that stage of life. So I have one, my oldest is about to go to college for the first time in less than a month. And my second son is going to be a senior in high school. So I think a lot about, and I try to sort of recalibrate their stress by providing my own example, by saying that my ideas of how my life would be and what direction I would go in were really very different when I was their age than now. And and yet, in a way, the specter and the kind of shadow or ghost of what I used to think was successful still does haunt me. And I think about it every time that someone reads my bio because I hear all the things that aren't being said. Um, the choices that I made, um, the choices that I made because certain career paths were compatible with the life that I wanted on a personal level. You know, obviously, I've made this somewhat ridiculous choice to have 6 children. Um, so that is within the framework of my community, which is, you know, a pretty well to do suburb of metropolitan New York where people are pretty well educated. Um, it's an anomalous choice. And I have to throw that out there because in another community, I have 3 children who are in in a Jewish day school, yeshiva. Within that context, you know, they're like, oh, sure, like only 6. That's sad, you know. It's very different depending on what community you find yourself. But within my community, it is anomalous, ranging to weird. But to me, I believe that success is something that's very personal. I used to think that success would mean that I'm looking at the bookshelves now that are populated by books written by other people. I used to think that success would mean that those shelves would be full of awards from random publications, organizations, institutions, conferring upon me this sort of like pat on the back, like you made it. Um, and now I'm like, can I say I don't really give a shit? Like, is okay, great.
You can say
If
that.
not, hello, editor. Um, but but like I really don't, you know. Like for me, in other words, in some ways, I think my life has taken a more traditional turn in that I view success as really helping my children to be their most true selves, whatever that may mean. And that may mean something that is completely unfamiliar to me. My oldest son is going to art school to study animation. That's something I knew nothing about, and now I know next to nothing about. But it's something that he's been interested in really since he could pick up a pencil. And so I viewed it as my responsibility to encourage and nurture that, but also to nurture the kind of confidence that it takes to not have your sense of self and success gauged by other people and by measuring yourself on scales of other people. I I think that there are many paths. In other words, I never go back to, this is a very long and convoluted answer, and so feel free to, take out what you will. But like, I never go back to my law school reunions ever because I know that to them, I'm not sure they would say I'm a failure, but I'm definitely not like a poster child for, law school. Like I went to law school. I did not particularly like law school. And then surprise, surprise, I did not particularly like being a lawyer. And then I switched to a different law firm because I thought, oh well, maybe it's just this law firm, and it wasn't. It was actually being a lawyer. And there was a great sense of, if you're talking about success, I think you have to talk about failure. And I think that both of those things are much more internal than I ever would have expected as a teenager. Because I think as a teenager, you see, and this is something that we work actively against in our house, this idea that like, oh, if I get into X school, then I will have succeeded. Like no,
Right.
then you succeeded in conforming to whatever algorithm of their needs, they may have, because maybe they don't need someone who draws, for example, in your particular style. Um, and then on the flip side, I'm just thinking of my son. He applied mainly to art schools, but he also applied to one very prestigious university that has an art school within it, and he was accepted. And so when people heard about that through the grapevine, they were like, well, of course you're going to go there. Like, who doesn't go to, a top 10 or whatever it is? Like, I mean, who's listed? I don't know, but like, who doesn't go there? And he and I went to visit because we were like, well, I mean, it's this school, like, it's a big deal. And we went, and he's like, this is terrible for me. He's like, there is like nothing that I like here. And, you know, and I felt such a sense of success then because I felt like, oh, check, one down, five to go. Like someone who knows who
Yeah.
they are
Yeah.
and what they want. To me, so that's the punchline, I guess, of this entire monologue that is success. Knowing who you are is step one of success, and knowing what you want and what you don't is step two. And then whatever you actualize in step three, that's kind of like the gravy on top, or the hot fudge on the sundae.
When you were growing up in your sort of family system, how was success talked about? Was it talked about? Is it something that you learned as a kid like that,
So
or
it's
not
it's
really?
it's funny you say that. It really, I came from a family a very smart family, that really valued it valued academic success above everything else, to the detriment of other things, right? Because now I've alluded to just casually the fact that physical fitness is something that I didn't really grow up with that being a priority, and now my 49-year-old body is like, you really need to like get your act together. So but so in other words, like I remember that there was this high school award ceremony, and I basically, I'm sorry, I sound like such a jerk here, but like, I
Do
basically like
it.
swept all the humanities oriented categories of like everything,
Right.
like to the point where, like it was ridiculous. It was like, are there, it was crazy. And I remember feeling like, yeah, I made it.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, like now, like who cares? I mean, who cares? You know, who really cares? But at the time, I remember feeling like, okay, like that's success, and getting admitted to a great college, like okay, like that is success. And so I think that it was never really overt. It was never openly talked about, but it was sort of this idea of my parents had always actively nurtured and encouraged our creativity. And they always, we traveled a lot as a family. We were very fortunate that, we there were four of us as children, and my two parents, and we went. That traveling was a priority for them, and we went all over the world. Like in the off season of everywhere. So I've seen like all the places in the world, like at the time of year that you were not supposed to see them, because that was like when you could get a better deal on,
Right.
on like hotels or housing or whatever. And on all the airplane rides, like they gave us a notebook and they're like, talk about what you saw, or like in the case of my brother, like draw about, what you saw or what you wanted to see or all these things. And so that was actively encouraged, but there were never like it was never a sense of like, in other words, they wanted us to be successful for ourselves rather than like wanting to show off the decals on the back of the car.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
When you realized after going to law school, becoming a lawyer, not liking it, was that a sense of failure for you? What was that
Very
transition?
much. Oh yeah.
And
And
how
not
did you
only
manage
that, but like I was a bad lawyer. And that was the first time, I think it wasn't the first time in my life I was bad at something, because there were other things in my life that I was very bad at. But those were largely things that I didn't really care about.
Right.
So it didn't matter as much to me. For example, I mean, I will never forget like junior year of high school, getting back an algebra test and raising my hand, or whatever class it was, and raising my hand and being like, so was this quiz out of 30 or 40 points? And the teacher's like, it was out of 100 points. And everyone in the class turned around and I was like, thanks. like because I had received, like a 29 on
Right.
on this test. So I was bad at certain things for sure. But this was something that like I poured a lot of effort into, and it just really, I was just really bad at like the attention to, I don't want to diminish it, like just this extremely scrupulous attention to detail is really fundamentally incompatible with I'm much more of like a big picture kind of thinker.
Mm-hmm.
And I get very impatient with the very things that were of paramount value to, especially to a younger law firm associate. Not only that, but I'd always been like seen writing as my main strength. And yet the kind of writing I was doing, they're like, this is not what we want at all.
Right.
So yeah, I saw it as a very big failure. And the partners at both firms where I work were like, you're not good at this. Like this is, and that was just such a blow. And it hurt a lot. And it hurt even though like the voice in the back of my head was like, well, I don't really like this either. But, but like, it was a very, I guess it was like a paradigm shift for me, because I had been on this trajectory of success, success, success. And then I got to the point, I got the great job in the great law firm that, that everyone wanted, and I was bad at it. And then I went to another one and I was bad at that too.
Well, and if people are watching this on YouTube and I'm smiling, I'm not smiling or laughing at you. I am smiling with you, because I relate so much, because I feel like I had to learn how to write again, because I loved to write creatively. And then I went and I was like we all share a lot of lawyer friends who are very passionate about things like the Blue Book. And I do not care. I do not care. And when people ask me to proofread things, and Riley knows this, I'll be like, I am not good at this type of proof. Like I'm good at certain types of proofreading, and other types I'm not good at, because I don't have that specific type of attention to detail to care. Like, and I don't. But one thing for me was, and it took a long time to realize this, but was that not only it was hard, like I did not think I was particularly good at being a lawyer, or at least that type of lawyer. Like I always wondered if I was like a public defender where it was just a different style and expectation. But that I always assumed that everybody else was as miserable as I was. And it was like a huge light bulb moment when I realized that people liked doing that.
Right.
Like, and it was like, oh, so there's probably something that I would like doing as well. Like there's other things for me to do, because there are people who are made for this and who genuinely like doing this. So my smiling as explanation was just because I 100% relate to what you just said.
I did not misinterpret it at all, but appreciate the clarification for the general public.
For anyone else, like
for all other viewers.
Yeah, like, oh my gosh, yes, everything you're saying, it's like, yeah, no, this was not, and it is sort of a blow when I don't know if this was your experience, but I Michelle Obama sort of talked about this in her book, where she talked about having this checklist of life, right? Where she did everything she was supposed to do in high school. You got those humanity awards, right? And you got into this great university, and then you went to the London School of Economics at some point, and you went to the law school, and you got the great job, and you're just checking things off, right and left. And then you get to the end of the checklist. And not only did you get to the end of the checklist, but you didn't totally like where it got you. So in addition to, her feeling was she didn't know what to do next, right? Because it was like, I did everything I was supposed to do. So we talked a little, Riley asked about that feeling of failure, but how did you approach that idea of like what was next?
I sort of was like, well, I'm about to turn 30. I should have a baby. So I was like, that's like an acceptable societal pivot, right? And it's another check on the list. At the time, living on the Upper West Side, where, you have to like fight your way through the strollers.
Yeah.
And I will say that I've been very fortunate in many things in my life, but one of them is that, unbeknownst to me, is that apparently I am some sort of fertility goddess. So that if you say words like pregnant or baby around me, and that's why I like to stay in rooms by myself, because you see the effect it's had. I mean, 6 kids, like that's a lot. So I'm very fortunate that I didn't have to, that it was really like the kind of thing where like I had the thought that I should have a baby, and
then you had a baby.
And I had a baby. So that was sort of like a natural, acceptable transition to being like, okay, I don't really see how the lifestyle of a, New York corporate lawyer is compatible with, being with the baby. So I'll be with the baby for a while and see how that goes.
And when you made that transition, how did you sort of manage the mental switch, right? Because you went from being, I mean, we've all been corporate lawyers, or I was a corporate lawyer. I guess you guys, it sounds like you guys were litigators, but it's the same level of intense sort of busyness, which is what we're talking about, to being it sounds like a full-time mom, which is a completely different level of busyness.
Right. And let's say a full-time mom in a, whatever it was, 650 or 700 square foot,
right,
1-bedroom apartment. And not one of those ones that has the little niche for the dining area either.
Right.
Like just 2 rooms, a tiny bathroom. And so I'm just going to say this is the one area where I'm going to tread lightly and carefully. Generally, I'm pretty much an open book, and I just like spill out everything. But this is also when I started having the realizations that that many people have had before me and that many will have since, which is that if you are having issues with your marriage, a baby, or in my case, two babies, it's because it was one baby and then 18 months later another baby, that actually does not fix your marriage. So I was struggling with a lot at that particular point. I did not leave my marriage until I left my marriage when my sons were 3 and 2 years old, was when the divorce became official. It started percolating before that. So that I can feel comfortable talking about it in the sense that that was like yet another quote unquote failure, right? To rack up on my ever growing list of, of failures. Which was that like the unforeseen things. I had certainly never foreseen that that I would be divorced, much less moving back into my parents' house with a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. So, which is what ended up happening. So I would say that like the transition, in other words, maybe the marriage would have lasted longer if I hadn't been like so aggressively 24/7 face to face with those issues. Because I think that like if you're working in a very all consuming job, I mean, we didn't even like see each other until, 2 a.m. many nights, and then like going back to work at 9. So, like you can live like that for a very long time. But when both the time dynamic shifts and, let's be honest, the power dynamic, right, of, not bringing in the 6-figure salary any longer, and being in a more traditional role. So yeah, I think that's a broad answer.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of environmental switch and then emotional switch really has to impact your feelings of self-worth and your feelings of who you are as a human. And so when you go through a time period like that where everything you anticipated being and doing and having has shifted, which is essentially what you're describing, that kind of upheaval, whether it's conscious or not, is bound to sort of shift your entire framework. And so how, once you moved back home, what was sort of the next steps for you? How did you come to, like, did you start when you were describing, I'm going to get to a question, I promise. When you were describing success and your sort of first step of understanding success, it sounded very much like what we describe as your inner voice. So being able to know who you are and understanding who you are at your core. And we talk about that as your inner voice, and being able to listen to yourself and hear yourself at your, at your innermost and like your core values and who you feel like you are, and just sort of hold on to that in the tidal wave of everything around us, right? Like all the noise and garbage that's thrown at us every single day, telling us who to be and what to wear and how to look and all that stuff. And so once all of this sort of upheaval happened in your life, which, that's a lot of trauma to experience. Once that happened, what was the foundation that you sort of went back to? What helped you rebuild and kind of come back together?
Well, I mean, thank God for my parents. My parents who gave me not only a tremendous amount of financial support, but also just real time, in person love and support, and that unconditional foundation of, we're here for you. There have been a lot of problems that I don't really feel comfortable talking about. When I was married, between my spouse and my parents, and so all of that was forgiven and gotten over. And my parents were really remarkable. I think like this, they had finally entered what should have been an empty nest phase of their lives, and suddenly the nest was full again. Um, and so they were just great. And I'm thinking of like everything from the little things to, after dinner saying like, why don't you go to the gym? The boys are asleep. Like, we got this, right? I mean, that's amazing, right? To living in their house in a great public school district. So when it came time for, them to go to school, they went to the same kindergarten that I had gone to, once upon a time. So that was all really nice. And it helped a lot because, it was a period of time where there were just a lot of different identities that felt like everything sort of felt out of place, right? Like I felt like here I am in my childhood room, right? Surrounded by all of my awards. Yay. Right. And I'm the only single mom in the carpool line for the nursery school. Now I can spin it as I was sort of a prodigy. Yeah, but really there are not very many divorced parents, and so like even that sort of like emanated a level of, on the one hand, like I want to say here and now, people, it's actually not catching. So it's not like the monkeypox of like marital, situations. So like if you have a recently divorced friend who has like very little kids, you can extrapolate from that the situation at hand was something that you never want to find yourself in, because it's very like it is not a whim to leave your spouse when you have, you know, two kids who are like, on the border of getting out of diapers. So, maybe a little bit of a hand of like friendly inclusion would be nice. And maybe like when and then like I finally got like the coveted, Saturday night friends dinner invitation, which no one wanted to invite you, like maybe it's my personality, but also like, I didn't want to be the third, like they didn't, I guess, want a third or fifth wheel at the dinner table on their Saturday night outings. And the one time that I was invited, like the wife goes to the bathroom and the husband tells me that he's going on a business trip to Laguna Niguel and he'd love it if I would come.
Oh no.
And I'm like,
oh,
right.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. So yeah. So, so there was that whole like bit of like being out of joint.
yeah.
And then there was this like wildly, I don't want to offend anyone by using the word schizophrenic, but like every other weekend, I would be going into the city and being with, my single friends. And it was just so interesting because like my married friends were all like, oh, tell us about like the places you went and what you did over the weekend. Like, oh, that's so great. And my single friends would all be like, oh, like, can you show us more pictures of your kids? Like, oh, they're so cute. So like everyone wanted something they didn't have. I was in the middle, and yet I felt so alone and out of place. And so it was just and so I think that was helpful in retrospect to me, because I was like, okay, I'm not part of a peer. I have no peer group. I have no peer group. I'm alone. And so it actually doesn't matter what these other people think of me. What matters is that I find a sense of purpose and success myself, because I'm never going to be able to live up to the standards of either one of these groups. I'm never going to be able to like go to the cool Russian, Russian like burlesque show at, 1 a.m. in the city,
Right.
like at the drop of a hat. And I'm never going to be able to, go to regularly have these Saturday night dinners at local restaurants with couples. So, I'm neither here nor there. So I need to be happy where I am.
Yeah. Did you feel like that then gave you sort of a sense of grounding that you've been able to carry through
A
once
hundred
maybe
percent,
you
a hundred
like
percent,
you got
yes.
out of that middle zone?
Definitely. And so the wonderful, the wonderful and unintended result of that is that I really don't particularly care what other people think. And that's been liberating.
Yeah, that's such a, I'm going to use your word, Tova. It's such a delightful place to be
Yeah.
once, and a part of it, I think, is age, right? Like at you, as we get older, we recognize that other people's opinions are just less and less important, of who we are, and we can hold tighter to that core sense of self, and that who we are is okay, the good and the bad, right? Like all the ugly and the messy is fine. It's part of being human. Um, but it is liberating to be able to just go to an event and be like, listen, this is who I am. You don't have to like me. I don't need you to like me. It's nice if you do. I'm gonna hopefully like you, but if you don't, that's okay.
Right.
Um, and it's what I've realized is that being able to model that to my children is so powerful because, I don't think our parents' generation necessarily grew up with that information or that ability. I mean, yours sound like they maybe had more than mine did. Um, and so again, I think it goes to that feeling of success. Like if I can teach my kids that well before I understood it, I'll feel like I've done like a few things right,
Right.
if they have that power. Um, I do want to talk a little bit more about busyness. We are going long, Tova. I don't know if you've been
Yeah, I've
keeping
been
track.
watching the time.
Um,
I'm the
so
timekeeper.
yeah, yes, you are the timekeeper for sure. Um, but I just want to ask a little bit about how you manage, and I'm going to totally switch topics. So
Sure.
this is not a smooth transition, everyone. Um,
Buckle up.
buckle up. You have a lot going on. You're doing a ton of things. You've got 6 kids, one's going off to college. How do you like what do you get it out, Riley? Words are going to happen. What do you use in your day-to-day life to sort of manage your busyness so that it doesn't become that sort of yucky busyness where you're stressed and anxious and overwhelmed and that kind of thing?
Well, I'm not sure that I successfully avoid being stressed and overwhelmed. There are definitely. I've never been the kind of person, and I view these reels on Instagram with sort of an anthropological interest. Who
Yes.
they're like, here's the travel. Make sure you have a travel kit of all the toiletries your kids use, at the ready. So then when you go on vacation, you can just like up and pop it in your bag and you're done. And I'm like, something like we're teetering on the edge of I'm like, does everyone have underwear that has like elastic that still functions? So,
Yes.
like we're not at that next level,
No
like,
way.
and where you have like the labeled container. I
I
mean,
don't even know
come
what
on.
that is. I can't.
So I'm much more like fly by the seat of my pants. I will say that I've always worked better under those circumstances though. Like I find that when I have tons of time, like it just unspools into like nothingness. So I do my best in like, and I think that that's what attracts, my twin career paths of law and journalism, are they're really for people who function like only with a deadline, right? So
Yeah.
that's definitely me. I do not do such a great job of navigating the busyness. I find that, um, you know, every year I have a little fantasy in the back of my head of like, wouldn't it be cool if like, I have this huge wall calendar and I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if like I marked off like, if my oldest kid was in red and my second kid was in orange, and like I wrote down, because of course we have like 4 schools that they go to. So like it's not even like they're all at school, and every week there's like a random, in staff education day, bring your kid in at 11:07, like, so and I've grown to see the humor in those things. So I guess that's my ultimate coping mechanism. It's not a sense of organization, as I'm sure my husband would freely volunteer. It's not a sense of capacity, or certainly not calm. My profanity use is really off the charts. Side story. I'm not sure. Can I use? I will not say it. I will say that I got a phone call when my 5th child was 2 years old, from her nursery school teacher, saying, "I need to tell you what happened at lunch today." And I'm like, "Is everyone okay?" She's like, "Oh, they're physically okay." And I'm like, "What?" And she says, "Well, your daughter was apparently conducting a profanity seminar at lunch." My 2-year-old daughter, I'd like to add, my 2-year-old was saying, she was up in front of her class of 15 fellow children, and she was saying, "When you say, 'What the F?' you have to say it like this: 'What the F?' You're both surprised and mad." And I'm like, well, I mean, that's not inaccurate. Like,
not wrong.
Like, that's pretty succinct, and I'm actually kind of proud. But I'm saying that, like, I'm saying there's a lot of like residual like F-bombs being dropped all over the place. So, but I have to cope with it. I cope with it by seeing like, this is hilarious. Like, this is really funny. And I think that is, hearkening back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, right? Like, if you can't find joy in this, and the best present I ever got having a baby was, my sister gave me a book by someone who had 10 kids, and saying like have fun or go home. Like, you gotta have fun. And I'm not saying that like every second in the house is like, the end of that 40-year-old version, like where they're like, it's in the 7th. Like, it's not like that at all. But it's like, we can laugh at ourselves, and at me, and I think that's important.
It's funny you say that, because I was my boys play baseball, and which I love. I love the game of baseball, which is great, because if you don't like the game of baseball and your children play baseball, it's
excruciating.
Painful.
That's
right. Yes. And I actually love baseball. Yeah, you're like, I can attest to that.
Yes.
I actually love baseball. So the fact that my kids play baseball is cool, because I could actually watch baseball like all day long. I don't know why, but I'm very thankful that I have that ability. It's like a superpower right now. But one thing interesting about baseball, it seems, is that while the soccer organizations are able to tell you in advance for an entire season when the games and practices will be, baseball cannot, because of the weather. Because it might, there might be weather. Now there also might be weather that affects soccer, in case you're wondering. They just then, if it does affect it, they reschedule it that day. But baseball, they can't actually schedule in advance. It's just something with the baseball that they can't do. And the first season, and Riley can attest to this, that I experienced this, or maybe the second and third even, it blew my mind that this is how we had to proceed, that I would not know the schedule for the following week. And while I do not have 6 children, I do have 3, and I do not have a spouse. And so, you have 2 to 6, I have a 1 to 3. So you do the math. It's a 1 to 3 ratio. And I would not know the schedule of baseball until that week. And it would blow my mind every week that it would be Sunday night. And I would be like, I still don't know what my week looks like. And then just this past spring, I'm on text chains, and of course they can't use the same app. So, I'm on WhatsApp for one and TeamSnap for the other, because can't use the same one. Sure. No. And one of the other parents wrote, "So when are you going to give us the schedule for practices for the season?" And I just started laughing, and I just wanted to be like, "You fool, you're not going to get them. Why would you think that?" And I was like, "Oh, oh, okay, I've entered the stage of acceptance.
Good for
Like,
you.
right?
That's great.
Like,
Yes.
yes. And I was like, I have entered the joy stage of this. Like,
Yeah.
Yes.
I have come, yes, I am in the acceptance phase.
Right. And I
laugh.
think that's awesome. And I've entered a stage where, so my sixth child, who is 7 years old, is like, she is going to be a lawyer because her attention to detail is acute. And not only that, but she also, so she's aware of the house in which she lives, and she is my secret weapon because she's very aware of that. She's like, she came in this morning, her usual like 5:55, like, good morning, mommy, cuddles, very nice. And she's like, just to flag it for you, next Wednesday is Halloween day at camp. She's like, I think that my Louisa costume from Encanto is in my sister's closet. So why don't you and I check today just so we can get it all set up for next week? And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, this is going to be so great when like you go to college and you just pack yourself.
Right.
And like,
I appreciate her on your behalf.
Yeah.
that's a gift. Like
That is a
it
gift.
took 6
Right.
to get there. I will
Yeah.
say that. And that's a
Yeah.
cautionary tale, but but great.
Yeah.
1 out of 6.
Yeah, that's right. You had to
It
get
was the
one.
odds. You played the odds.
I did. She's got her shit together. That's great. At least one of us does.
Right.
Good for her.
So we have taken up so much of your time.
Yes.
I think it's the other way around, but okay.
We could take up so much more, but we are going to respect a little bit of your busy life. We're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to come back with our rapid fire questions.
In case you didn't already know, we love talking.
True story. More than simply talking, we love researching, prepping, and bringing this podcast to life.
We launched We Go Boldly with the goal of reaching people dealing with the kinds of questions and concerns that we also face.
Things like how to hear my inner voice, how to make sure my habits are worth it and stick, how do I feel my feelings and still manage to function?
After years of personal work and lots of trial and error, we realized we have a lot to share on these topics.
Now we've been broadcasting for over a year, and we are proud of our podcast.
And to no one's surprise, we still have a lot to say and talk about.
We sure do. We need your help to keep going. Every episode takes time and money to create, and we would love your support.
So, if you like what we are doing, please support us by joining our Patreon community and becoming a monthly subscriber.
Join our Patreon community today at patreon.com/wegoboldly. We are so grateful to all of our supporters. Now, back to the show. All right. So welcome back, everyone. We have these bold questions. There are 5 questions. We ask you to answer them, succinctly. They don't have to be one-word answers, but as succinctly as possible. And I do not ask follow-up questions. Okay. So you're just, you're on your own.
Okay.
Right there. I know they can be very stressful. Riley, when she asks the questions, find them incredibly stressful to ask.
Well, I mean, as you can see, succinct is not really.
I can't help but ask follow-up questions, so this is brutal for me.
So, but I think these lend themselves, for the most part, to succinctness. We'll see. Okay. I might have spoken too soon. Question number 1: what is on your nightstand?
Okay, a thermometer, obviously. Because we're in a pandemic.
Sure.
A bunch of books, none of which I'm reading right now. An eye mask. Eardrops, because of the last time I had an ear infection and I haven't bothered to put them back. Several pens, and somebody's lost Elsa and Anna bracelet that I assume that they'll come and collect at some point.
Question 2: Who's at the top of your playlist right now?
Lizzo.
Yes.
Period.
Yes. Question number 3. How do you relax?
I relax by wherever I am, opening the Kindle app on my phone and submerging myself in that book and ignoring everyone in my home.
This is hard, not asking follow-up questions. Question number 4. What is your favorite beverage?
Two-part answer. It's got to be fizzy. So it's either seltzer or it's Prosecco.
And the last question number 5. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
I don't know if it's the best piece of advice I've ever received, but it's definitely a keeper that I use all the time, which is always leave the party while you're still having fun. And that might be on, spoiler alert, that might be on my tombstone one day. I won't be around to see it, so but it's a good one.
It's a good one.
Your instructions.
Yeah.
If somebody follows your instructions. I love it. Well, this was delightful to continue the theme of my new favorite word. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Where can people find you on socials, podcasts? Where can they read you?
Emblematic of my general life approach, my website, www.jordana, Jordana, Horn, HORN.com, is not up to date and only has 5 kids. So, so don't go there. I would say there's really no, you can follow me I'm irregularly on Twitter at Jordana Kvells, Kvells. So sometimes I pop in there, but it just drives me too insane to be on Twitter too much. I prefer to sink all of my emotional resources into social wiring on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm Jordana Horn on Instagram, and there are regularly links to the podcasts in there. And then on Facebook, Jordana Horn Gordon. So I
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I was thinking of you. I have postcards that I've picked up at your house that I'm going to be writing for you. I imagine I'll be picking up more postcards over the next 100 days. I think
we have to save democracy.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. That is of utmost importance. So we have less than 100 days to the midterms. Not something we've mentioned on the show, but maybe we'll start a little countdown. There's less than 100 days.
We should do that.
By the time this airs, it'll be closer to
there'll be much less than 100 days by the time this
75
airs.
days. So
so get your act together and do something to help America.
Yes, I highly encourage postcard writing, and I would say that postcard writing is an excellent activity when you're watching a show that actually requires you to pay attention.
That's true.
Just to do a big full circle back to the beginning of the
I like that.
Well done, Tova.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks everyone for listening and watching. Thank you so much for being on with us today, Jordana. We really appreciate it. And we will be back next week with another episode on busyness, self-worth, and everything related. We will be back. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.